There are still a couple of nodes that we have not talked about. And yeah, let's talk about these nodes real quick. So I'm just gonna pull in all the nodes that we have not talked about. Alright, we have these 7 nodes. So let's have a look at the first node, the blend landscape node. Now this node requires 2 landscapes, so I'm gonna make one more real quick. Alright, this will be our second landscape, and this is the first landscape. And we can now blend these two together. To be more precise, it's blending landscape 2 into landscape 1. So the landscape 1 is the main one, and the secondary one is the landscape 2, like so. And let's have a look. So you see the landscape 2 is blending into the landscape 1, like this. And you can change the blend distance to smooth out the blend region between the two landscapes. So you see the blend is a bit smoother, and the smoothness is about 50 meters. And since World Blender supports multiple height channels in the landscape, you can specify your height channel here if you have custom height channels. Alright, for example, let's say this one is H1, alright, and we can blend the H1 height channel of landscape 2 into the default height channel of landscape 1. And here we have the mask. The mask indicates which landscape is being used in the final result. We have black for the landscape 2 and white for landscape 1. Next we have the convexity processor. This processor will process the details of the landscape and generate a convexity map. So let's have a look at the convexity map. So you see this is the convexity map of the landscape with the current levels of details. And let me just increase the details and see how it looks. Let's say 8. So you see we have a lot more details here. And we can change the radius to increase or decrease the size of the details. So let me try 10 meters. So you see we have a lot of smaller details. And next is the quality parameter. This value indicates the accuracy of the convexity map. So let me lower this to 1. And it lost a bit of quality. And let me increase this to 4. It's a bit better, right? It depends on what kind of details you have in your landscape. If you have like a lot of straight and sharp cuts in the landscape, then you might want to increase the quality a bit. Next, we have the normalize parameter. We can turn this off to have the true convexity map. And with this mode, the convex areas will have positive values and concave areas will have negative values. And the borders between the black and white, these are the flat regions, and the value at the border is 0. I can imagine that this mode is not that useful for most cases, so I turn on the normalize parameter by default. You can have multiple convexity map in the same landscape by specifying a custom convexity channel. For example, let's say C1. So now I have a C1 attribute that store the convexity map. And then I can create another convexity map, let's say C2, using different settings. So let's say 25. So this is the 10 meter convexity map. And this is 25 meter convexity map. And again, we can specify a custom height channel to calculate the convexity map on. And next we have the crop landscape node. This node will crop the landscape based on these 4 parameters. The max x parameter indicates the right side to be cropped away. The min x value indicates the left side to be cropped away. And likewise, the max and min y indicate the top and bottom side. Let me reduce the x value, and you see. And currently we are using the real world unit in meter. So this landscape is from minus 500 meters to 500 meters. So we can set these values somewhere between negative 500 to 500. And we can change the absolute mode to relative mode. And in the relative mode, these values indicates the percentage of the landscape to be cropped away. So these should be within 0 and 1. So 0 is the left side and 1 is the right side. For the y parameter, 0 is the bottom side and 1 is the top side. Let me show you the effect. So you see, it's cropping away based on the percentage of the landscape. So if we set this to 0.5, it's gonna crop away half of the landscape. And next we have the move landscape node. Now this node does a simple task, that is to move the landscape. However, it is different from this node, alright? This node can also move the landscape. However, this node does not update the internal texture coordinate to match the new position of the landscape, alright? And this node, it will move the landscape and then update the internal texture coordinate, okay? So when you need to move the landscape, always use this node instead of the transform geometry node, alright? And next we have the resample landscape node. This node will resample the landscape into a different resolution, and this resolution can be higher or lower than the resolution of the input landscape, alright? So the current input landscape has the resolution of 128, and currently it's resampling the landscape to 100. But let's try 32, you see? And you can also increase this to something much higher, for example, 1024. There we go. And we also have the viewport reduce parameter to reduce the resolution in the viewport. And unfortunately, at the time I make this video, in Blender there is no way to automatically transfer all the attributes from the old landscape to the new landscape. So you can specify up to 4 additional attributes to transfer to the new landscape. For example, after I erode this landscape, we will have like the dirt, the bedrock, the flow and stuff like that. And we can specify those channels here. Dirt, like that, and flow or water or snow, something like that. Yeah, something like that, alright? Next we have the smooth landscape node. So let's have a look at the smooth landscape node. This node will smooth out your landscape, and you can specify the size of the blur depending on your purpose. But if you set this to 0, then it's gonna use the maximum possible size. So let's specify this to, let's say, 25 meters, maybe 10 meters. So this is the input and this is the output. You see, it got rid of all the details smaller than 10 meters. Let's try 5. We have a little bit more details. And you can repeat this node by increasing the iterations value. If you set this to 4, then this node will run 4 times and smooth out the details 4 times. And you can set the weight to decrease the effects of the smooth iterations. Let's say 0.5 and set this to 1. So you see it's the weight of the filter. And yeah, each iteration will use the same weight, alright? And again, you can specify a different height channel if you want to smooth something else. And finally, we have the update landscape mesh. This node does a simple task, that is to update the landscape mesh based on the height channel. Let me just erode this real quick. Alright, I have multiple height channels within this landscape. Alright, we have the bedrock, the dirt, the flow, and stuff like that. So let's see the dirt channel. There we go. So you see we have a bunch of dirt here and we have no dirt here. Using this node, you can visualize the amount of dirt you have within your landscape. And let's have a look at the bedrock. So you see this is the rock layer without the dirt on top. This is the landscape after the erosion. We have the bedrock pointing up like that. And we have the dirt filling up the valleys. And here we can view the bedrock only without the dirt. Another use case for this node is to update the landscape mesh after you manually manipulate a height channel. So These nodes will manipulate the height channel and then update the landscape mesh. However, if you manually manipulate your height channel, then you need to use this node to update the landscape mesh based on the new height channel. So let me just do that real quick. I'm gonna call in the default height channel. There we go. And I'm gonna multiply this by 2. And I'm gonna store this as the new height channel. There we go. So the mesh is updated thanks to this node, but let's see what happens if we don't update the landscape mesh. So we still have the exact same mesh as before, even though we have a new height channel already. So when you manipulate your height channel manually like this, you will have to use this update landscape mesh to update the mesh with the new height channel. And that's it. That's all the landscape processor nodes. Let's look at something else in the next video.